before the world called his name, before his voice softened the hardest moments in people's lives. There was a man who carried a truth he never dared to speak. It showed in the small pauses between interviews, in the tight breath he took before answering the simplest question. Someone once asked him, "Are you happy?" And for a moment, he did not hide. Not particularly. The words fell quietly, but they carried the weight of someone who had been holding his breath for years. It was shocking only because of who he was. A man whose songs made strangers believe in love again. A man celebrated on every stage, wrapped in applause that seemed endless. Yet even in the brightest spotlight, his eyes told a different story. A story of distance. A story of someone who could lift others with his voice, but never found a place soft enough to land for himself. He was adored by millions, but loneliness followed him like a shadow. He could make a crowd rise to its feet, but the silence after the curtain dropped was a place he knew too well. There was something he kept hidden, a truth shaped by fear and by the expectations placed on black men of his generation. A truth he spent his entire life protecting, even at the cost of his own peace. So the question is not simply what he hid, it is why a man so loved believed the world would stop loving him if he ever revealed who he really was. If you are willing to step into that quiet space he lived in, then let us begin. He began in a small apartment in Manhattan. Long before anyone imagined his voice would one day circle the world, his mother worked long hospital shifts, returning home with the calm strength that kept the family together. His father sang around the house, filling the rooms with a warmth the boy would later chase in every song he created. His name, chosen from a simple pasta advertisement on a nightstand, became the name that carried the future of soul music. He was the youngest of four, the one who watched quietly, the one who listened more than he spoke. His sisters, Pat and Anne, were the first to take him by the hand and show him what music could be. They brought him to concerts where he sat wide-eyed as Dionne Warwick and Aretha Franklin lifted entire theaters with nothing but breath and truth. Those nights changed him. They allowed him to imagine a life shaped by sound, but childhood did not stay gentle for long. When he was 8, his father died from complications of diabetes. The loss carved its place deep inside him. Years later, when he wrote "Dance with My Father," he was not writing a song. He was reaching for a moment he never stopped missing. That longing settled into his voice, giving it the ache people would recognize instantly. At 9, his family moved to the Bronx. The neighborhood was loud, alive, and full of music. Yet the house itself carried a quieter grief. He used the piano to fill that silence. Teaching himself the patterns of chords and the feel of melody, it became his refuge, a place where he could make sense of things that felt too heavy for words. In high school, he began to find his shape. He created a fan club for his favorite singer, Patti LaBelle, a small act that showed how deeply he admired the voices that spoke to him. He joined a group called Shades of Jade and stepped onto the Apollo Theatre stage. The Apollo was a proving ground, and he knew every singer who stood there had to earn the room. When he finished his performance, he felt something shift. For the first time, he sensed that music might be more than a dream. He tried college. He tried to follow the expected path, but the pull of music was stronger than every plan laid out for him. He left school and walked into the uncertainty of a young artist's life. He performed at Apollo Amateur Nights. He joined a theatre workshop called Listen My Brother. He appeared on Sesame Street, learning how to hold himself in front of a camera and an audience. Piece by piece, he built the foundation of a career without ever knowing where it would lead. He was not famous yet. He was not a legend. He was simply a young man trying to turn the only thing that made sense to him into a life. Success did not arrive suddenly. It came quietly at first, like a door opening a little wider each year. And then, almost without warning, the world heard his voice the way he had always hoped they would. At 30, he released his first solo album, Never Too Much. The title track carried the joy and precision that defined him, a sound polished by years spent in the shadows of other legends. This time, the voice in the spotlight was his own. The album was more than a debut. It was a declaration. A man who had spent his youth blending into the harmonies behind Roberta Flack, Donny Hathaway, and David Bowie now stepped forward with a sound unmistakably his, smooth, confident, laced with the longing that had followed him since childhood. People heard it. And they believed him. The 1,980 seconds became the decade that shaped his crown. Song after song found its way onto radio stations across the country. Forever, for always, for love, give me the reason. They were elegant, precise, crafted with the care of someone who understood how fragile the heart could be. Lyssnarsfeldsin, even when he sang about things he never admitted openly, his voice turned stages into sanctuaries. Here and Now, released in 1989, climbed into the top 10 and gave him a Grammy. When he held the award, he did not boast. He smiled with a quiet pride that suggested he knew how long it had taken to get there. He sang love songs, but what he offered was something deeper. A sense of calm, of belonging, of gentleness, rarely given to black men in American music. He was no longer just a singer. He had become a standard, a touchstone for what romance should sound like. Artists lined up to stand beside him. Janet Jackson, Mariah Carey. Their voices folded into his like silk over warm stone. Even the most established performers spoke of the gravity he carried in the studio. He listened closely. He corrected softly. He built harmonies with the precision of someone who knew that beauty was made, not found. The public loved him. Critics praised him. And younger artists studied him. John Legend would later say that every slow jam his generation made carried a piece of the road Luther paved. Usher spoke of learning how to hold a room by watching how Luther held a single note, boys too. Men followed the emotional template he created, layering tenderness into their sound, the way he had shown the world it could be done. At his peak, he stood in a rare place, admired, trusted, beloved across generations. He filled arenas, yet sang as if he was standing in someone's living room, offering comfort to a friend. His music became a kind of shelter, a place people went to remember love or to hope for it. This was the height of his reign, the era when his name became synonymous with elegance and warmth. But even as the world embraced him, there were shadows gathering behind the applause. Shadows that would soon follow him into the years ahead. The shadows arrived quietly at first, not with scandal, not with chaos, but with the kind of loneliness that settles into a person over years. He carried it through hotel hallways and backstage rooms, through long nights on tour buses, through moments when the world applauded him but did not truly see him. He had built a career on love songs, yet love was the one thing he believed he could never safely claim. In private conversations, late at night, he confided to friends that the world he lived in did not allow him to be himself. Lenny Kravitz remembered the silence that followed their talks, the way Luther looked away when the subject of his personal life grew too close. Women screamed his name, but he once admitted he was watching their brothers instead. A simple truth, a dangerous truth in the era he lived in. The world was not kind to black men who dared to be different. In the 1,980 seconds and 1,990 seconds, homophobia was woven into every layer of the industry. To admit who he was could have shattered the image his career depended on, so he hid himself. He locked the most human part of his life behind a door only a few friends ever approached. Patti LaBelle was one of them. She loved him deeply, and after his passing, she spoke openly about his struggle to live in a world that demanded silence from men like him. Her honesty set off a wave of debate. Wendy Williams pushed back, saying a friend should have protected what he chose to keep private. The argument revealed something larger. Even in death, he was still trapped between what people wanted from him and what he had been afraid to give. But the hardest blow did not come from secrets. It came from a night in 1986, on Laurel Canyon Boulevard in Los Angeles. He was driving his Mercedes convertible. The road curved, the speed climbed. In a single irrevocable moment, the car crossed the yellow line and struck another head-on. The crash was violent. 3 people were injured. Larry Salvam, sitting in the passenger seat, did not survive. The guilt was immediate and lifelong. There was no alcohol, no drugs, only speed and a mistake that could not be undone. The courts charged him with reckless driving. His license was suspended, and the Salvam family, once supportive, filed a wrongful death suit that ended in a financial settlement. The tragedy carved something into him, a quiet sorrow that even music could not soften. And just as he tried to move forward, another wound opened. A British magazine claimed his dramatic weight loss was caused by AIDS. It was false, cruel, a reminder of how vulnerable he was to rumour. He fought back with a lawsuit, defending not just his reputation, but his dignity. Through all of this, his smile stayed gentle, but it carried strain. His eyes grew tired. The world still loved his voice, but the life surrounding it had begun to fracture. Across America, the world he lived in shaped the silence he carried. The music industry of the 1,980 seconds and 1,990 seconds demanded a specific kind of man, especially from black performers. Strong, desirable, unquestionably straight. There was little room for vulnerability, and even less for honesty. To step outside that narrow image could cost a career, and he knew it. In those years, conversations about sexuality were whispered, not spoken. A black man in R&B faced a double burden, judged both by the wider world and by his own community. Homophobia was not an opinion, it was a structure. It shaped careers. It closed doors before they even opened. So when he chose silence, he was choosing survival in an America that was not ready to hold him without judgment. The press added its own weight. Tabloids built stories from shadows, filling gaps with speculation rather than care. One rumor, printed without mercy, suggested that his weight loss was a sign of AIDS. The accusation was not only false, but dangerous, feeding into a fear that defined the era. He fought back, filing a lawsuit, refusing to let the world rewrite his life through the lens of ignorance. Yet outside the noise, the people who loved his music held him differently. For many Americans, his songs scored weddings, réunions, first dances, last goodbyes. His voice became a fixture in black households, a reminder of warmth and softness, rare in male R&B singers at the time. Even listeners who never knew his private struggles felt connected to the ache beneath his notes. And when he passed, the response revealed the depth of his impact. Artists from every corner of the industry stepped forward. Aretha Franklin, Stevie Wonder, Beyoncé. They honored him not just as a singer, but as a foundation, a blueprint for how to hold emotion with dignity. Tributes spread far beyond the United States. Radio stations across Europe and Africa played his music for days. Writers reflected on the quiet courage in his work. And in 2021, Google marked his 70th birthday with an animated tribute, a recognition that his voice had become part of global memory through all the years and all the distances. One truth remained. The world he feared might reject him ended up embracing him more deeply than he ever allowed himself to imagine. In the final years of his life, the world saw him less, but his voice seemed to echo even louder. It carried the weight of everything he had lived through, the loneliness he never admitted, the secrets he protected, the tenderness he offered to millions, even when he had little left for himself. When he suffered the stroke that changed everything, his mother sat beside him day after day. She held his hand, she spoke his name, she filled the quiet hospital room with music he once loved, hoping the familiar notes would guide him back. And for a while, he fought. He tried to return to the world that had both lifted him and wounded him, but the climb was too steep and the pain too old. When he passed in 2005, the news moved through the country like a soft shock. People stopped in their kitchens, in their cars, in barbershops and living rooms. They listened again to the songs they had grown up with, remembering the moments his voice had carried them through: weddings, breakups, homecomings, loss. His music had been a companion for a lifetime, even for those who never met him. At his funeral, legends filled the church pews. Aretha Franklin sang. Stevie Wonder bowed his head. Voices that once stood beside him now rose to honor him, not with grand gestures, but with quiet gratitude. They knew what he had given. They knew what it had cost. His legacy did not end there. New generations continue to find him. Young singers study the softness in his delivery, the restraint in his phrasing, the honesty in the ache of his notes. Critics place him among the greatest voices ever recorded, and listeners, old and young, still turn to him when they need something tender enough to carry their own unspoken feelings. Some stories end without closure, but dignity does not need applause. His life was imperfect, complicated, marked by brilliance and sorrow in equal measure, yet from that mix, he created a sound that felt like home to anyone who has ever held a part of themselves in silence. His story is a reminder you are not alone, and you do not need to hide forever. If this journey brought someone to mind, share their name. Someone might need to hear that they are seen too.